Miles, in terms of what independent voters and even Republican voters or consumers of right-wing media are taking in, they're not even trying to hide their hypocrisy anymore. You've got Tucker Carlson on this asinine apology tour for backing Donald Trump 3 times over 10 years when emails revealed that 7 years ago he thought he was, quote, demonic. And you've got Jesse Watters, like as though the cameras aren't rolling on his hypocrisy. Let me show you Jesse Watters on Republican gerrymandering and Jesse Watters on pro-democracy gerrymandering.
When a fighter is out on his feet, Harold knows, you knock his ass out. This party is delirious, and the Republican Party has to take full advantage at this point. We have to kick the illegals out of the country, we have to kick them out of the census, and we have to gerrymander to the tilt. Why? Because the Democratic Party cannot be trusted to be the opposition party anymore. They have to have a permanent minority.
Fox News alert. According to the AP, voters in Virginia have approved Democrats' plan to gerrymander congressional districts 50 to 49. This could flip 4 House seats from Republican control to Democrats.
It has to be done. It has to be done when it disadvantages Democrats and Democratic-leaning seats, and it's when it does the opposite.
Well, Nicole, there's a reason they have that phrase, eat crow, because crow is not a bird that's considered edible. So the hypocrisy, it tastes really bad. That's where the phrase comes from. To eat crow is not a good thing. And these people are grimacing as they're eating crow. You and I both saw Tucker Carlson's podcast where he's trying to eat crow. Man, the guy looks, body language, all very uncomfortable. But here's the good news, and you hit it at the top, Nicole, which is that even though we're not going to offer fast forgiveness to these people, the people that listen to them, the tens of millions of folks following them, especially the Tuckers and others that are trying to show contrition, those folks are backing away in the polls from Donald Trump. That's why a lot of us last year were asking, why is he only in the low 40s? This guy should be in the low 30s in the poll numbers, maybe in the high 20s. And it's because there were people in his base still holding on, and he has been losing them in droves. In fact, Nicole, when Donald Trump came into office, 50% of Americans disapproved of his tenure as president on day one before he even started. But that number is now 2/3 of Americans, and it's about that high among independents. Independents are just running away from this guy. And there's something interesting about this, Nicole, and it goes back to the gerrymandering, because Donald Trump came in and he told us, what was this presidency going to be? His operative word was, it will be retribution. This will be the revenge presidency. Mm-hmm. And we have found out that this is the backfire presidency, because when Donald Trump went to attack our democratic institutions in Texas, instead what he saw is what we got in Virginia. It totally backfired, but it's the same thing with his attacks on his enemies here at home. He goes after Letitia James and James Comey, it backfires. He goes after Don Lemon, it backfires. He goes after the state of Minnesota, and it backfires. And even abroad, he goes after his enemies abroad in Iran. And what has it done? It's backfired with presidency-wrecking poll numbers. That's what this presidency is, and the vote last night cemented it.
Nick Corsini, this is the Associated Press's reporting on a Trump voter weighing in on how that vote feels to this voter 15 months in. Quote, Catherine Bright, 60, a retired captain in the U.S. Air Force, regrets that she supported Trump in the last election. Quote, I feel disgusted with myself. I feel betrayed. Like he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, she said. She was initially drawn to Trump because of his vows to support veterans, to avoid foreign wars and lower costs. Quote, it's like high school class president. I'm going to promise we're going to get pizza every single day, Bright said. Then as soon as they get elected, they're like, oh, I lied. What is your sense of what is driving? You know, he's a 67% disapproval rating. Those are extraordinary numbers by any metric. But to Miles' important point, he'd sort of had, I mean, he's always had a ceiling, but he seemed to have a floor, and he's now under it. What do you think is driving that?
I think there's two critical things here. And when you look at the Trump supporter base, if we were to go back to 2024, I went to dozens of his rallies, and his supporters could rattle off their grocery bills. They would tell me how much a chuck roast cost, how much the milk cost, how much everything cost. None of that has improved. In fact, it's gotten worse. So one of the central pledges to so many, say, like non-dyed-in-the-wool MAGA voters was that just their life would improve, and costs have only gotten more, especially when it comes to gas. So I think that economic message that won over so many independents, that won over so many Republican-leaning voters, that's just vanished, and there's frustration there. But the other thing that's really, I think, eating at his base is the conflict in Iran. There's a large part of the MAGA voter, ones who weren't necessarily traditionally Republicans, but who Trump pulled in 2016 and has held an ironclad grip on for 10 years. They're very isolationist. They do not like foreign conflicts. And so seeing a war, not even of necessity, but one that was done, as critics will say, clearly out of choice, that's really eroding at his base. So those two twinning things, I think, are really eating at support that had seemed immovable. But it's because two of the most core tenets to that base haven't been met or have just been outright ignored. And we're seeing that in votes across the country.
I mean, Miles, those two things plus the number that's coming up in the polls that 71% of Americans disapprove of his temperament. His temperament, I think, is largely unchanged. I'm not one of these people who thinks he's deteriorating in full view. I think he always sounded bat bleep crazy. But the fact that he's reversed himself on every policy, and he's got America now in what seems like a very, very challenging war in a country much bigger and more complicated and in some ways entrenched than Iraq or Afghanistan in Iran, with control over the Strait of Hormuz, has people feeling that his displays of just bizarre behavior, stuff that Marjorie Taylor Greene calls, quote, insane. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting about invoking the 25th Amendment. And then, even in his post last night about Virginia, quote, I am an extraordinarily brilliant person, and I had no idea what the hell they're talking about. His attacks on the Pope, where someone probably told him to say it was doctored, and he went out and said, I was a doctor. I mean, there's just a lot of really weird personal conduct that is sort of in the pipeline with rising prices, a foreign war in a place that is really jarring to a lot of people, tariffs, economic instability, and rising gas prices.
Well, I have to agree with your first point. This was always the case with him. I didn't see a different Donald Trump in the first term. In fact, that's why I was so incredulous after my first encounters with the man. And then for those 2.5 years inside the administration, very important issues we would go in to talk about in the Oval Office, matters of life and death. And there was always a weird non sequitur, a complete distraction, unfocused, couldn't remember things. The guy was a basket case. There's no better way to put it. There's no academic way to put it. He was a basket case. Any normal person would have sat there on the couch in the Oval Office and said, what's this guy taking? What's he on? He's acting in such a bizarre manner given the subject. So that was always true. But now that more people are opening their eyes, I think is a product of what you just said, is that he fooled people into thinking he was going to take care of them. They believed it. They were willing to look the other way on the temperament piece. And in polling, you would see folks even say, well, he does it just in jest, or he does it to get leverage. And now they're seeing the truth. He doesn't do that. He is just a basket case. I mean, just look this week, Nicole. The conservative Washington Examiner writes on its opinion pages that Donald Trump is losing his marbles. I mean, these institutions that have backed him through everything are now just throwing him overboard, to say nothing of the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Megyn Kellys of the world and folks like that. Whether they're doing it for, their own podcasting purposes and their political futures or not, it is giving people at the grassroots of the MAGA movement something to hang their hats on when they say, you know what, I can't abide this anymore. And one of the things that I think drove it more than anything, Nicole, Donald Trump could not have encapsulated his crazy better than he did 2 weeks ago when he said, I'm going to destroy an entire civilization tonight. Effectively, that's what he said. The people he has spent years promising he would avoid World War III and protect them from World War III saw that sentence and said, things are getting really scary in the Oval Office, and it's been a downhill slide since then. It
is still, just as we've all sort of been in and around politics for a really long time, it is remarkable in the moment to see it happen. You know, and I think there were some people who either out of fear or self-preservation thought it would never happen. To watch this collapse is still staggering and stunning. And because of who he is and all the things we've been talking about, still frightening.